So something fun I want to demonstrate real quick that we're not going to use for our final product, but is sort of a fun workflow that I like to use a lot for animating characters with KineFX, is this sort of procedural character animation based on mixing and matching different poses. So this is like a really simple little run cycle for this character that I could totally use as like a kind of cartoony, stylized, stepped running animation that involved me basically using 2 poses to make this run cycle. It was super simple and easy to do. Basically, I have my setup with my IK chains here, and if I plug this in here, you can see this is what this pose looks like. I have, again, like on the left side here, my FK setup, and I can move the hips around and control all that. And then my legs are IK, and if I want to, I can move these this world space rig pose kind of however I want. And I can, rotate the legs and kind of choose how I want it posed. And I just set him up to be running so that his, left arm is going forward and his right leg is going forward. And there's this skeleton blend node here, which is a really awesome little node. And I can basically, with this, I can animate, it's like a blend shape for skeletons, and it kind of considers all of the rotations of all of the different joints in your skeleton. And so I can animate kind of between these 2 poses. So if I wanted to smoothly animate between 2 poses, I can do it by animating this bias and having them both plugged into a skeleton blend. I could also have it so it is only dealing with translates or only dealing with rotations, or scale for that matter. I'm just sort of like trying to milk these 2 poses to get a quick little run cycle. And so basically I have like 2 frames on the left side of the run cycle, and then what I'm doing over here is, and I'll get rid of the skeleton blend because we don't actually need it, is I have, this pose and then this pose, and then I have this pose mirrored over here and this pose mirrored here with the rig mirror pose. And I put it all into a switcher and I plug it into the bone deform. And then now I have it basically, you can see the switcher is cycling between these 4 frames in a loop. And the way I'm doing that is with this very simple little function up here, where I'm basically saying, take the current frame, divide it by 5, so that we are, taking 5 frames to move forward a new frame. So it's sort of like for, if you've done 2D animation, this is what, cell animators would call animating on 5s, or a lot of the times they'll animate on 2s, which is like for a 24 FPS animation, animating on 2s would be animating at 12 frames per second, animating every other frame. So this is fun. This is animating on 5s. It kind of gives it almost like a stop motion feel. And I really like this kind of way of animating. And then this modulo function, percent modulo operator, makes it so that this sort of repeats every 4 frames. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 0, 1, 2, 3, 0, 1, 2, 3. So it's cycling through all the inputs. So this is how you can do that. I also put it in a ceiling function so that it wouldn't divide the frame literally. It's rounding all the numbers up to the nearest integer, and then it's doing the modulo function after that. So it's super handy, and the switch just lets me kind of switch between all these different poses and then run that through my bone deform, and then I have my little running character. So super simple, super fun. You can play with different settings on the rig mirror pose. I'm having it so it specifically is just mirroring the bones that are kind of on each different side and not the bones in the middle. And I'm, with naming these bones, I'm able to specify, mirror the ones that are labeled L with the ones that are labeled R. So yeah, that's basically how a quick little procedural setup like this works, but it doesn't stop there. There's more kind of fun things that I can do on top of that. So for example, I could run this through chops, and I've made an HDA called the jiggler that I like to use a lot, which is literally just wrapping up the jiggle chop so that I can then jiggle the bones a bit. And I'll do this a lot, and I can sort of play with the settings here and get really fun sort of procedural tweaks on my animation and give it like a little bit of something extra. So it's sort of on 5s, but like not quite. And this is like a really funky little style that can be sort of fun to a fun way to animate stuff without you having to manually do all the in-betweenings and hard animation work. In addition to that, though, KineFX has added in Houdini 19 a really awesome tool called the secondary motion SOP. The secondary motion SOP is really cool. It's sort of a built-in way of doing some of that stuff with jiggle and just adding, you know, extra secondary motion to joints and things like that. It's a little bit more complicated to set up, but you can control it nicely, and it takes into account things like rotations, which is very handy with rigs. So really quick, I will just demonstrate on one of the arms. So basically, we have this arm that is swinging and moving based on these joints, and so we have this whole kind of joint chain moving, and I want to have that be influenced by one of these joints down the chain from that. So I'll pick a driver joint, which will be maybe the clavicle. I'm not sure how this will work out, but let's try picking the driven joints to be sort of the rest of that arm. And then with the lag and the overshoot, you can see we get a little bit extra movement there. The arm is kind of moving on its own. And I can multiply that effect if we want. I can change the amount of lag and overshoot. I can make it so that there's like a bunch of overshoot, or that there's no lag, or that there's more lag and less overshoot. Or I can set it to be maybe driven by the hip joint or something instead. So if I pick that and have that be the driver, and then I'll also select the clav to be driven, we'll see now it's kind of jiggling sort of the whole arm and stuff like that. So that's kind of cool. There's definitely better ways to show this off and show examples of this. But also, if I wanted to, there's other effects in here as well. So there's this jiggle effect, which is similar to what we were just playing with, and you'll see all those same kind of parameters here, but it's not using chops at all. This is an entirely SOPs-based effect, which is awesome. Also, I could say select the hip and then select like the rest of the body here if we wanted to get something kind of like what we were doing a second ago with the jiggler that I made, except now this is using just a tool that's built into Houdini directly rather than a chop that I wrapped up into my own custom HDA. So that's cool. I can also turn on translation so that the translation gets affected just like it did in the jiggler before. The jiggler was only affecting point positions and stuff. And now I can minimize this just to give it a little something extra beyond sort of the input animation. There's sort of lots of fun ways that I can play with this. I can make it really insane, obviously. I could turn off the rotation so that it's only sort of interpolating the translation and stuff, which is kind of an interesting look. And it's just really fun with KineFX to be able to play with this animation in a procedural manner, rather than, you know, strictly keyframing the animation exactly the way you want it to be, and then having to kind of go in and manually make tweaks if you want. This way I can sort of like animate something simply and then tweak it sort of with all these different kinds of tools that you have built into SOPs, which is awesome. Another fun tool that is worth showing off as well is using something like a solver, which is going to be affecting everything like a simulation where each frame affects the following frame. And I can do something with maybe a skeleton blend, and I can bias it halfway in between the previous frame and the current frame, and that will create sort of a interpolation between these different joints, rather than if I turn this off, it's just doing the same snappy animation. So there's lots of fun ways I can play with this, and if you tweak the interpolation to be sort of more biased towards the current frame, then you'll just get a tiny bit extra, which is kind of nice, versus like having it be completely snapping from one frame to the next. You can see that there's definitely a significant difference between having that on and having it off, even though it's subtle. You know, or you could have it biased even less, which will, you know, isn't necessarily super useful, but for something maybe you could find a use for this. So just sort of trying to illustrate that it's really awesome to be able to play with all these different tools in SOPs, and there's so much beyond this that you can do with KineFX. It's incredibly powerful. So one thing I'm realizing with this character that we've made so far is that it's a little bit awkward to animate because the feet are so long and the legs are so short, making it sort of awkward to properly sort of bend the knee and not have the leg push through the floor and all this stuff. But thankfully, because we've made this in a procedural manner in Houdini, we can fix this pretty easily. So let's use this as an opportunity to take advantage of that crazy rig that we made. So first I will go up here to where we have the legs. I'll make a copy of this leg. There's a few things I could do. One is I could make the legs longer. I could make the feet shorter. I could do both, but I think that because I don't want to have to deal with moving the bones around and I want it just to kind of work as is, and also I kind of like the way that he looks, I'm going to leave the legs the same length, and I will just clear this stroke. I will, in order to be able to see the last one, I will convert VDB, and I'll convert it to polygons, and I will template flag on there so that I can then just draw a new leg that matches the old one pretty close, but has a shorter foot. And I'm pretty happy with that. I think that will be great to work with. So I'll just plug that in here, and I could leave this in case I wanted to switch back to it later, but I don't really care. And then so it's going to take a second for it to run through all these nodes again, and then it's going to have to quad remesh it yet again. So this is another good reason to use something like the Exoside quad remesher instead of doing your own custom topology, because it will be a lot easier to make this kind of tweak when you can just sort of run it through the quad remesher. Bring it down here, I'll stash this, and then I am going to have to change the skeleton slightly. I'll move this bone, set it to tweak mode, and I'll move this bone over here, and I'll move this bone over here. And now we should pretty much be good. It's just gonna recapture. Yeah, and now I can bring it down here, and we will have an animated guy. Oh, let me turn off the secondary motion stop. Now, it's going to be a little bit weird because of the way that the feet are animated, but I can fix that pretty easily by going into here and adjusting the rig pose and making sure that that foot is sort of positioned properly again on each of these. Make sure I'm on the right frame. Yeah, here's the first frame, and I will turn that like that, and I will move this foot around. It looks like the foot is like rotated weirdly like that. I want it to kind of be bent up like this now, I think. Which I can do now because the foot isn't so long that it's going to kind of intercept through the ground. And I'll move this foot like that. And yeah, I'm relatively happy with this. I might have it so he kicks his foot back a little bit more. And yeah, this is okay. This is a good enough tweak on that walk cycle. But like I was saying, I don't really want to have this type of animation on our final guy. Our final guy is going to be a big lumbering version of this character that is going to be walking very slowly, and it's not going to be stepped at all. It's going to be sort of slowly interpolated. And the way that I did this before is by using some slow mocap that I ran through Mixamo, but because I want to keep everything Houdini native, I am going to instead use some of the very handy built-in mocap in Houdini, of which I have some right here. If you just type in mocap biped, you'll see there's mocap biped 1, mocap biped 2, mocap biped 3. I will grab mocap biped 2 because I know that that has this walk fast animation. And while we don't want him walking fast, we can adjust the speed of this animation. And this is exactly kind of what I want. This kind of guy feels like this could be a big slow-mo guy. Maybe I'll cut this even more to 0.25. This is really good. Maybe a little bit faster than this, maybe 0.35. Yeah. This is a giant guy stomping through a city or whatever. So great, let's bring that in and use this as our animation source on our weird little character that has completely different proportions. So to bring that animation in, the first thing I'll do is clean this up a little bit. I will package all this stuff into a subnet so that we don't have to have it taking up space here, and I'll call it switcher anim, since we were doing the animation with the little switcher there. And then I will do a scene character import. That's what we want. So what I want to do here is just grab the subnet path of the mocap biped, and then all I need to do is just grab that third input where we have the animated pose, and now we have the bones and everything for mocap, and I can, you know, go ahead and edit them with the rig pose here or whatever I want. So it's, you know, we're able to bring this stuff into KineFX very easily and tweak it and play with it, and it's all kinds of fun stuff you can do with this mocap in here. But what we want to do is retarget the mocap to our weird little guy instead of this humanoid character that we have up here. So in order to do that, I'm going to use a few nodes. One is the rig match pose, and I will work off of the capture pose right here, which is the middle input. And so what I have to do here basically is just sort of like line this up with our weird little guy over here. So I'll just spend a minute doing that. So great, I have this all lined up, and the next thing I want to do is a map points node, which I will plug into the exact same inputs. And this is pretty straightforward. You're basically just saying this point maps to this point, this is the hit point that maps to that hit point, this point maps to this point, etc. And I'll just spend a minute doing that. And I didn't do a perfect job here. Keep in mind, like I just sort of like quickly sort of generally moved everything roughly in place, but we are going to be able to tweak this on the fly once we sort of see how everything's working, and we'll be able to get it sort of exactly the way that we want once we have everything hooked up and all the points mapped and all that. So yeah. Now, one thing about the rig match pose is it's using this reference frame, and that is the frame that we are applying this on. So what I want to do actually is skeleton blend so that after frame 0, it's using the animated version of the pose. So I will set this to be $F is greater than or equal to 1. And that way I'm able to bind at this rest pose, and then it will switch over to the animation right after. And what I can do next is use a FBIK, full body IK, and plug that into here and see how this looks with the animation. And it will probably be a little bit weird. We'll probably have to do a little bit of tweaking, but it's a start. It's looking not not like the worst thing ever. So we can definitely fix this. So one thing I can do is hop back into the rig match pose node, and I can move this stuff around until it kind of feels right, and just sort of like noodle around with it and try to get an intuition for where this stuff should be and how it should be placed. So that's not too bad. If I just move sort of the shoulder up a bit like this, and maybe I can move the clav kind of in a little bit like that. That's not bad. That's maybe that's what I want kind of for both of these. So I'll just kind of move things around a bit, and it does take a little bit of messing to kind of get a good feel for like how this stuff should be working. I also haven't mapped the fingers, but maybe I'll map the fingers onto each of these bones. But off the top of my head, one of the things that I'm kind of noticing as well down here is that these feet, now this one over here feels kind of right in terms of where it contacts with the ground and stuff, but this one is obviously kind of at an angle awkwardly. So let's make it so that when it's here, it should be kind of flat. And maybe the way to fix that is rotating this one just like that other one. So there's these little tweaks that you're going to want to make into the rig match pose node. But yeah, I think already this is feeling a lot better, and you can sort of see by taking a look at this character, and we can translate it over on X to see what they look like next to each other. How, yeah, now we have this mocap applied to this much different character, and it's kind of fun. Also, if I go back to the rig pose, I can just like rotate this clavicle just a little bit and see that that kind of helps me bring my arm out a little bit more. So I'll just do that slightly, and now it won't be as worried about it intersecting with the ground and stuff. This is probably perfect for what we want. There's a few other ways you can modify the animation here. We can of course do stuff that we were doing before, like add jiggle and secondary motion. On the full body IK node also, there are several options that we can use to affect how this animation is looking, and how it's sort of solving the full body IK system. So we can play with the iterations here that it uses, which can help smooth things out a little bit, but make it take a little bit more time to solve. So you're not going to get quite as good performance if you crank that up. We can change the damping, which if we go crazy with, you'll see it really sort of like dampens that animation and makes it so that we're not getting nearly as much dynamicness, but it's kind of helping smooth things out conversely. So if we go with like, no damping, you'll see it really freaks out, and temporally it's kind of all over the place. So you want some damping in there. The default of 0.5 is pretty good. There's also this tolerance parameter, and you can use that to change sort of like how much it tolerates different levels of input animation and stuff, differences between frames and joint rotation and stuff like that. That's also something that you can play with. It seems like if we have that pretty low, it's fine. So I would keep that low unless you're getting some kind of bugs in your animation. And then on top of that, there's also there's this other solver mode. You can use this fabric solver instead if you want. And I tend to just stick with the Houdini physical full body IK. I find it to usually be better, but it's worth a try sometimes to mess with fabric if you would like. Okay, so now that we're in a good spot with this animation to play with, let's clean this up a little bit by adding in a null to specify that this is where the raw animation goes out. I'll call it anim out, and we can move on to the next section where we will be setting up a little vellum simulation to add a lot of extra jiggle to this character.